All right. Welcome to Automation Hour. This is our 51st episode. So thanks for joining us. And if this is the first time you're joining, all lines are muted. And we do ask that you post questions to our Trailblazer community. And I'm going to put that in the chat window for you to post your questions too. We will be taking a look at the questions out there at certain points in time during today's presentation, and we will be posting the recording as well as the deck out to the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community as well as the website automationhour.com, and we will also be sharing that out via Twitter. All right, and we do have several upcoming sessions scheduled out for the end of the year, and we did have a scheduling conflict for Cheryl Feldman, so we did have to reschedule her out of October into December. So if you did register for her session, you're still registered for the December 7th one. And again, if you want to register for these, you do want to go out to automationhour.com, upcoming webinars, and we have links to the registration pages for each. And we will be looking to schedule our webinar series for the first few months of 2019 soon. So if you do have a business use case with a cool process automation solution that you would like to share here, please direct message any of us and we will get you on. We do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io. Without them, we wouldn't be able to bring you this free webinar series. So thank you for supporting us since the beginning. And here are your co-hosts, David, myself, and Rakesh. And without further ado, we are very excited to have Meighan back on. She is a repeat presenter on Automation Hour and a fellow MVP. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Meighan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And do this, go full screen and share my screen. There we go. Excellent. And can you guys see my screen? Hopefully, yes. Excellent.
Good.
So hi, you guys. My name is Meighan Brodkey. I am a technical architect at Exceed Consulting Group, and I'm a Salesforce MVP as of this year. I am a blogger. My blog is meighanrockssf.com. I'm also a co-host on System.debug. It's a podcast about Salesforce development and the platform. We often have guests that come onto our show as well. You can check us out on YouTube and on the iTunes store. Brian James, Ryan Headley, and the infamous RJ also on the show with me. I'm also a presenter. I presented at Dreamforce 17 and 18, as well as a number of community events. Some of my most frequently talked about topics are communities and, of course, automation. I absolutely love the platform. Salesforce was my first real job out of college, and I actually got to have my first job working for Salesforce as a customer success manager and helping people learn how to use Salesforce better. It was love at first login, went from being a customer success manager to an admin to developer to architect, and it's exactly what I want to do, and I love doing it. Anyone who's ever had the opportunity to sit down and spend time troubleshooting with me can tell you that sitting around and dealing with bugs and problems is probably one of the most fun, exciting things that I do. I'm a Trailhead addict. Love playing Trailhead. badges and points that exist only online that I cannot touch are some of my favorite things in the world to collect. I am a Seattle Women in Tech user group leader. And you can also find me on Twitter, hanging out in the Twitter sphere at the strangest of all times throughout the day and evening. Today, what I want to talk to you guys about are flows and flow components. So we're going to go over what is a flow component. What are the different types of flow components? You have screen components, action components, then there are lightning page components. We're going to go over what each one of those does, how you can use them, and the differences between them. From there, we're going to build a flow with components. It's going to be a demo. I've got a flow put together, and we're actually going to go in there and go through some of these components that are out there and go through how to set them up so that you can see how they work and how they can be configured. Then we're going to run the flow, and then we're going to take a look at resources. As an admin, where can you go to find out about flow? And then as a developer, what is it actually going to take to build a flow? And what are some of these use cases that you can come up with to use them? And then we're going to have some Q&A. If you have questions throughout, feel free to send them over in the chat. Happy to answer them. I know there's a lot of different things we're going to have going on, so want to make sure that you're not sitting there before I move to another subject and ending up feeling completely lost. So, what is a flow component? So, flow components are relatively new, and they're pretty awesome. So previously, when you used a flow in Salesforce, and by flow, I'm talking about a visual workflow. You would launch your flow in Salesforce, and you could add fields, you could add, the text, the currency, you could add a pick list, all these different types of things. But a flow component is this ability to add an actual lightning component onto a screen and as like a standalone action within a flow. There's also flow, the concept of flow actions. And these can be traditional Apex-oriented actions. What exactly that means, we'll dig into that more. Or they can be a new local lightning component-based action. And this is all brand new. We have a pilot going on right now for this. Super fun stuff that you can do with it. You're looking at things such as at the end of your flow, instead of just going back to, at the end of a flow when you hit the end, you just end up going back to that very first screen. If you're on a screen flow. Well, with this, you're able to then go and you could redirect to a new record. You could have a modal pop up. These different types of things. That's what's included in a flow action. There's something that's actually going to take you somewhere. It's going to do something. And then you have your flow screen components, which are components that are displayed on an actual screen. So the other type, we have our lightning page components. A number of you have probably worked with the lightning page components. If you've used that lightning app builder, you may have had the opportunity to sit there and actually add that flow box to the page, go in there, select your flow. You have lightning page components available there. Flow screen components are probably some of my favorite. There are just so many use cases for them that you've probably always wanted to have in your flows. And it was like flow was almost there, but just couldn't get you there. And you were like, oh, we have to build a custom component. So flow screen components are what are going to give you that whole UI, UX functionality. You're going to have that ability to make things prettier, to give you field types that you didn't have before, to go in. Greatest one, probably most exciting, was the very first one that came out of the box, which was the ability to upload a file directly from a flow screen. And super exciting because before, that wouldn't that wasn't available. You couldn't just add a button and upload a file. But now you're looking at adding custom styling. You're adding headers and footers. You're adding your own buttons. You're adding dynamic questions. You have all these different opportunities. Anything that you can think of to add to that screen, just like everything else in Salesforce, with enough money and time, you can absolutely build it. But it's one of those where you now have that opportunity to add it to a flow without having to build an entire component. And, if you only need one small piece to be custom, for example, you have a 8-screen flow, but the only thing that you need is one lookup field. And that was the only thing that made it so that you had to previously build this entire custom component. Now you just need to build a lookup field. You completely changed your projects and simplified them and streamlined them. Now you have also the flow action components. Like I said before, flow action components, they actually do something. So when you think about it, I said before, you could redirect to a URL. You could have a modal / pop-up box come up on a screen. If you're on a record and you wanted to drop down into the related list after something is done, you could do that. You could send an email. Those are all things that are actions, hence action component would be perfect. This is something that's in a pilot stage. We've got this great little chart that comes with it about, when would you use this? So big concept of the direct data queries. This is when you're definitely going to be using your flow action components. If you're actually querying data, going through this whole concept of, is there something that needs to be done to do it? Yeah, you may need a screen component, but you absolutely will end up needing some sort of action to probably be doing that if it's, not in Salesforce. And going through and just thinking about it, if it's something that needs to be displayed to you and it's, you're not actually going somewhere else, obviously it's not on the screen. So thinking about it that way. Then next one, we have our page components. These are the ones that are the most common. They're the ones that came out first. And they're probably what you think about when you think about having a flow that's going to be on a screen. So these are the ones that you're going to think about when you're on your Lightning App Builder. These are what you're thinking about when you're in your community and you're updating your community page layout. And you're going to drag and drop that flow component onto the page and select your flow. They're awesome. And they're super easy. You're also going to be thinking about here the concept of, where does next best action come in? You haven't heard about the next best action component. I don't have a slide for this one. I should have done it. It's a great one. So my favorite example of this is, let's say you've lost your debit card or your credit card. Everybody's done it. So you go online and you go, okay, cancel my card or hold my card, depending on if you misplaced it or lost it. So you press the button in the app or online, depending on a laptop or phone, either way. You've frozen your card. The next best action component, what that would do is it would say, hey, I see you just, canceled your card. Do you want to validate these previous transactions that just happened? And do you want to order a new card? Those would be your two next best actions. Oh, fantastic, fantastic concept. Out of the box tool. Awesome. I highly recommend giving it a try, even if it's just in your dev org. And let me just do, why are you doing this? Let's go back to here, go here, and where are you? Go back to flows, and close that. Good data table. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at that. That's just, there we go. Allow. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a flow. In this flow, I have a handful of screens. And on those screens, I believe all but one has at least one of the screen components on there. We're not going to dig into every single one of the components, but what I want to do is kind of give you an idea of how these different components can be used together and how they're configured. So there's this concept of this lightningflow.net site, and ignore the Google part, just go lightningflow.net. It's a great website. It was put together unofficially. Mind you, this is not a Salesforce site, but it was built by a number of people that are part of the Flow product. And what they've done, thank you, is they've built a number of components, screen components, action components, and they've actually linked to a number of blogs, tips, tricks, resources, and you can actually install the different components that they've built into your org. Right now, out of the box, you end up getting the file component, and new with winter, you have the dependent pick lists that they're able to get. And some of these components are being packaged and put onto the App Exchange. There's now an entire section on the App Exchange for Flow and Flow components, which is awesome. You know, always making sure that you're thinking about going with that declarative first when you can. You know, I'm not saying let your requirements suffer. Never, don't do that. That would be a bad idea. But always think about the platform. You know, leverage Salesforce, then leverage declarative, and then go code. And you know, it's something it's difficult and it's hard to think that way sometimes. But visual workflow can be your very best friend. It's an extremely powerful tool that lets you query everything from your standard objects to custom objects using custom settings, custom metadata types. And you'll even see today custom labels are available for you to use, so that we can even, in this you'll see that it's the option to use multi-language within a completely configuration environment. So here we are in our flow, and I'm going to start off with the language screen. So waiting for Salesforce. You'll notice on the Add tab at the very bottom, this is where you have the extension section that's going to be showing up automatically out of the box. And this is where you have Lightning component now. And here you'll see that this is where I've added the language component. In this org, we have a language object that is a custom object. And here we're able to load in the records we want to use. We want to have people select from a lookup in this situation. Obviously, you know, personally, I think this would be a horrible design for a real situation, because there's no reason for me to actually use a lookup for a language. So I wouldn't recommend this, but I think it's a great example for the lookup field because it's one of my absolute favorites. So here we have language, and you'll notice that this, as a developer, these are the different points that you're going to be building into your component. And so thinking about each one of the different items that you're going to need to have, and making sure that you have each one of these very clearly labeled and very clearly designed, so that as an administrator or as the person doing the configuration, you can easily build the flow without having to continuously call up and ask, I'm sorry, what does RV1 mean? Or what does RD2? And it makes it so much better. Some of these, as you go through on the lightningflow.net, there are great videos that go with a number of the components And honestly, I can tell you personally, a number of those videos I have watched over and over and over and over while trying to configure some of the components. And that's one of the great things that the community is there for, is to help you when you get stuck. And I have to say that I have relied on a number of people out there to help me with configuration of a couple of these. Specifically, the dynamic question was a bit frustrating. So if anybody gets stuck ever setting that one up, I've got it down now. Just let me know. I will help you through. One thing that's really helpful, tip for developers, anything that goes on the Outputs tab, start it with the term output. Something that's consistent, very helpful, and it seems to be across not just a single developer, but it seems to be becoming consistent across apps. So very nice. And so here, having different values, noticing displaying output which field as a value, and then output value. Setting these properly. This is obviously not a field, so switching over, going through again with flow, creating these directly from the record, and here you'd be able to add your objects. And so building these, you'd go language, and going to, one thing to keep in mind when building with flow components is that you're now working with code, and that your input output type you actually have to start to pay attention to a lot more than you did previously, and that making sure to actually select it as input output rather than just input starts to become important. And so going through, and here you would type name. The actual value you want to display is the name of the language. And going down, click on this one, hit OK. Going through, so across the top here, one thing I've set up this flow to have are the different stages with the chevrons across the top. Not something I'm going to be digging into too much here, but definitely something, if you have questions, we can go back to. But if you haven't used them, they're tons of fun. Just having that ability is always exciting, and it makes things a lot prettier. They do default to the blue and green, just keep that in mind. So this is my one screen that doesn't have the lightning components on it. The reason I included it was to show you that you can easily mix and match your screens that have flow components with screens that don't. So you can either have a screen that has a lightning component, screens that have no components, or screens that have a combination of the two. And you would set this up just like you would any other flow screen. You have the option for validation. You have the option to write help text. All that's available to you. And so jumping over here to the contact info. This one again, the contact. I use the lookup field. And then here on the phone, I'm actually using the lightning input component. I really like this one because what it does is it allows you to give a specific format to your fields. However, with this single component, you can say, I want it to be a telephone, or I want it to be number, or I want it to be currency. It's a multi-use component, so it's really, really helpful. And so you have your different types that you can choose from. And then here you determine the pattern. And so by typing in the pattern, as I did here, where I have the 9, then the 3, the 9, the 3, 9, the 4. If somebody tries to type in their, and I have dashes between those, if someone tries to type in their phone number as, for example, 55-555-5555, they're going to get an error. And I don't have to write any validation in, because this is going to take care of that validation for me. And what's really nice is, that way I can make sure that my data is going to come into the system the way that I need it to look. And again, I don't know how many of you have actually had to write a component where you need somebody to format something, either like a social security number or an EIN or a phone number, that every single person that writes it in, you would think there could only be so many ways to enter it, but there are somehow 30 million more ways than you ever thought there ever could be. And your data ends up feeling so much worse than you ever thought. And here you are trying to expand your way to collect information, and you feel like you somehow just took a hit to your data. And of course you rebound and you end up finding out ways to keep it clean. And you did have measures in place, but end users just always find a way to trick you. They're very sneaky. So just something to keep in mind. And so having a component that has built-in validation options for you, super cool. And as a developer, something that's a really cool thing for you to keep in mind when building for your users. Then here you have your output. One thing that you want to have for output is, where do you want to store things? That's always something to keep in mind, that when you have a component that you're putting data into, there should always be something that's going to hold that data so that you can later assign it somewhere in your flow. There's nothing worse than getting all your data, then you go to run your flow and all of a sudden you get a bunch of errors because your data never went anywhere. And you wonder, like, where did it go? How did this happen? And so you're then stuck in this situation of having to go back and figure that all out again from scratch. And so the next one we have is the address screen. And one of the things that I find really valuable, especially after having done quite a bit of work and on situations where I've had to work with multi-language, is the ability to use custom labels with flows. This also comes in extremely helpful when working in the world of consulting as a whole. So you build your flow. As a consultant, you then have to hand off this product that you've built to someone that may or may not have experience in working with flow. They may or may not know, depending on how much you've built, it could be a pretty hefty flow. And there could be a number of things about it that, they weren't part of that part of the build. Perhaps this flow's been passed down from person to person. And so custom labels can be extremely, extremely helpful here. By having it so that you use the label of your field as a custom label, what you can then do is go in, have the custom label be the text. Then when your client or your customer or even yourself has to go in and make these changes, so that now you've decided that no longer do you call it the postal code, now call it the postal/zip code, and you have to go in and change this. It's a lot easier to go and change a label, so you don't have to save a new version of a flow than anything else. So one thing that's super helpful to keep people from having to edit the code, from keeping people from going in there, even yourself from accidentally making a change, is to use a label. And this also gives you that option to now go multi-language. If you just use a label every time you have to have a field name, you've just now set yourself up to go into a fully dynamic multi-language situation at any point in time that you need to, which is huge. And especially with the fact that we're looking at screen components and screen flows. And so here you'll notice I have the standard billing street. Then we're going to hop over to the billing city. Okay. And I'm going to jump down to postal code. It's not as fun. Okay, here we go. And here we have our billing state/billing country. here's another flow component. Again, a screen component. And we now have a dependent pick list. Notice the flow runtime dependent pick list. This is the new one for winter. And it's going to be across the board super, super awesome for everyone. Previously, to have a dependent pick list, the only way that you could do it was to either have it question 1 on one screen and question 2 on the other. Or you could, try and do not a real, you could either try and do like a lookup and a lookup, or you could have this huge giant mess that wasn't actually a dependent pick list, but more like 2 different types of questions that were unrelated, but it was called a dependent pick list in the app, and it was really, really frustrating on the app exchange. So there were all these things that were going on, but now there's a truly dependent pick list that's available to you, and it's awesome. I love it. Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorites, especially because, when you're using screen flows in situations, oftentimes you're collecting information. So many situations fall under survey, questionnaire, Q&A, anything like that. And one of the things that I put into probably at least a quarter of the flows that I've built are state and country. And oftentimes that country wants to be dependent upon the state. And so either you put it on 2 different screens, or you just really, really hope that people don't mind the ginormous lists, or you build something custom, and it's really, really frustrating because there's a lot of awkwardness that goes into it, and it's a lot more effort than ever expected. And I understand why it took so long to come out, but it's really cool now that it did. And so here we have our state and country. And here we have our outputs. So again, keeping in mind what are the outputs. We actually have our values, which is what people are entering. But we also have to keep in mind what are the labels for the fields. That's an output too. And so one thing to keep in mind when going with a custom label is the fact that your output, you also have the variable, but within that variable, you're going to need to have something for that label. And plus there's now the label. And it's a couple more items to your changelog, but if you are in a situation where you'd be getting set up to go multi-language in the future, it's going to save you a lot of effort compared to going back to redo all this in the future. And then next thing we're going to do is we're going to update our contact. So here's where we looked up which contact it was, and we're going to throw in their language, throw in their address. The last thing we want to do here is add some documents. Again, this is another out-of-the-box component. And so this, again, was the very first component to come out. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, but I believe was it spring or winter? One of the 2, like a year ago. And so here we have the option to, we're going to connect to that contacts ID. And here we have the accepted formats, whether or not we want to allow for multiple file uploads. We have the content documents IDs. We have the option to enable or disable this button. We can add some hover text, and then we can have uploaded file names. All pretty standard options that can go along with that. And then here we have contact ID. Awesome. And then outputs. Again, a few different options go along with here. Accept formats. They're all displayed in the same places. Something to keep in mind, this can be very frustrating and confusing the first time setting up some of the components. So again, when setting up some of the components, if they're from the lightningflow.net site, number of the components that are out there on the App Exchange and on GitHub, they have very, very good documentation. It's a lot of information written out. They have videos to show you how to set things up. Plus, there are people out there on Twitter and in the ecosystem that are there to help you. I wouldn't sit there and be frustrated. I would try and reach out and get some help. Feel free to tweet at me if you'd like. I can let you know whether or not I've set it up, and I can let you know what I found out or direct you to a resource. But yeah, this can be a bit of a pain point. And there is an idea on the idea exchange about having output listed on output and input listed on input. So I highly recommend voting for that. Awesome. Okay, so now we have this beautiful, beautiful flow. I'm going to double check that contact because now I have myself second guessing myself. And so, yeah, contact ID. Let's try it the second time. Perfect. We're going to hit save. So next step is going to be for us to create a language record together that says English. And then we are going to go through this flow. One thing to warn you about is right here, when you save a flow that has Lightning components in it, you are going to see this message. Don't get scared. I remember the first time I saw it, I panicked. I was like, oh no, I got warnings. What did I do? The only reason that it's up there is to let you know that flows that have Lightning components can only run in Lightning. Who would have thought? I was terrified though. But luckily it's only the yellow sign versus the red sign. So in that case, we're okay. So we're going to hit OK. We're going to jump over here and we're going to create our language record. And this one to do language. I hope everybody's having a happy Friday. Very exciting day. I'm going to enter English, and I'm going to do one for Spanish too, just to show off the lookupness. Awesome. All right. And so here we go. One of my favorite things about the Flow Designer is, I'm not sure how many of you have been using this, but this debug button. With the debug button, you're now able to actually jump into your flow. And yes, with run, you could run it previously, but now you can set your variables. And so we can decide what is it that we're setting. In this situation, we don't need to set any of these, but if you wanted to, let's say we only wanted to test with one specific contact, we could do that right here. And we could always make sure to enter that contact ID. And so here we're also able to decide, do we want to run the latest version of this flow? And are each flow called by the sub-elements? And then do we want to see all the details on the side? So you might notice over here it says debug details. That's where we're going to see a column of all the notes about what's happening with our flow as we run it. And so I'm going to just hit OK so we can get started with running this. And you'll notice here we have our language lookup. It's a pretty sweet lookup. You have a little drop down there, or we can go here and do ENG, message, and hit enter, hit enter, and next. And you'll notice that it accepted my term of English. Still have my previous and next buttons, but here I have my check boxes. They came up just fine working with the component I had before. To kind of show you about that little sidebar that I showed you, or I was mentioning, I didn't show you, I'm showing you right now. Sorry about that. But you'll see here, look here's our little component. And it said, what field should we display? We should display the name. And the label should be language. This is all that information we entered. And we get to see it all displayed right here on the side. The advantage of this is if we do run into a problem, what we're able to do is we can see where that problem is right away. And we never had to activate our flow so that we didn't have to go back and deactivate our flow and do another save as and create another version if we do hit a problem. It's, it's one of those things that's one of those small things, but depending on what you're working on, it can be one of those small things that just makes your day. So here we have our checkboxes. I'm going to hit next. And look, here again, we have our name and our phone number field. So really quick, I'm going to go and grab a contact. Let's see, contact's name. Oh, look, I'm my own contact. I'm going to type in Meighan Brodkey. And then here I can enter a phone number. I'm going to do 555-555555. You'll notice that I didn't enter that phone number correctly. So it's going to yell at me. And here, when I enter it properly, now it's going to be happy with me again. It's one of those things where, again, we're able to protect our data by doing that, just that small entry of formatting. Here's where I'm going to enter my street. Again, this was just a standard text field. And then here, we're picking up, this pick list was missing. That's awesome. Here, the United States, and this says Washington. And here we enter our zip code. Following that, we're going to hit the next button. And this is where we're able to upload our files. So if we jump back over here into Documents, and we can take a look at setting for the documents to find out what was going on here for whether or not it was true. So this does say true. And so finding out why it was enabled versus, oh, it's because it's not connected to the contact. So contact wasn't set yet. All right, so we had that. And so we can go back there. Biggest question is, why didn't our state and country show up? Since we were able to see it here, we don't have to go back through and do the whole save as redo. We can go back in here, double check what the setting is, and say, hey, what happened? Notice that pick list isn't the right pick list. Jump back onto account right now and set that pick list to the right pick list. And as soon as Astro's done snowboarding, in the next 2 minutes, we'll have the right field set, rerun it in that debug, and we'll be all good to go. So while I set up that field, any questions?
So we did have a couple of questions from Riju. I have a question regarding lookup component for the visual workflow screens. I was playing around with it, and I understand it can return ID of record and display name. But is there a way I can use the name in my flow too without using a lookup resource? I'm trying to use a formula to name my opportunity created using the account name selected.
So you want to pull back the name in as well as the IDs, but you want to reference the name in a formula?
She's basically saying she wants to reference the name in creating her opportunity without having to look it up.
Well, no matter what, it would have to, well, no matter what, the account has to get selected somehow. But once you have it, we can double check that component and see. Let's see. But you can, because we returned the name field and we have it stored in a variable. So you should be able to just reference that variable again, because we have the name stored in the language name. So we can just use the language name at another point in time in the flow. So yeah, you should be able to.
Okay.
Because we have it saved somewhere.
And then we have one more question out there from Michelle. So am I correct that pretty much any Lightning component used in Flow needs some modification by a developer? Nothing can be used out of the box by an admin?
You can install components that are created specifically for Flow. There are 2 components that come with your org out of the box that are specifically for Flow. But the creation of custom components would take a developer to build. Once they're built as an admin, you can use them within any Flow. Does that make sense? Okay. And then I'm adding our state, and then we'll reference this and we'll be all set. Any other questions?
So Michelle followed up with, what about the unofficial Flow resources or the stuff going to the App Exchange? Is that out of the box ready?
You should be able to use that in your org just straight out of the box, yeah. So the ones that I just demoed today for the lookup field, for the address, and then for the for everything except for the file and the dependent pick list. The rest of those were from the they're available on the App Exchange, they're available on GitHub, and they're available on lightningflow.net, and they took no customization. So here our problem was the fact that we were looking at the account and we should have been looking at the contact. And then we just created 2 custom fields. We could have used the state and country pick list, but we're going to use our 2 new custom fields. So we'll go contact and then do state and do country and then do outputs and do, oh, here, reference to the account again. So this would be mailing state. Or no, pick list value 1. This is our state. And then we'll do our country. And then we're off because we haven't. Oh, one thing about Flow to keep in mind. So if you add a new field, you actually have to close Flow and reopen it for new fields to show. Now there's this really cool new Flow designer that's coming out in spring that's going to be so cool, and it's non-Flash based, and it's going to be the most magical thing we have all ever seen in our lives. And I can't wait for all of us to have it. It's going to be great because we won't have to do that anymore. Just so everybody knows. It'll be a happy, happy day. And so now we'll do the state in our country. We'll run the debug. And then, yeah. This has been fun. I can't believe how fast time went, you guys. I'm sorry I talked so much. I was hoping you guys would talk a lot more with me. All right, so dropping in our state and our country. And I'm going to talk to you guys about a couple of resources. And then, all right, this should be, so you saw before when I typed that in, get it on the, let's do that. Country, okay, save. Notice, oh, I have never actually activated this flow. I'm sorry, that debug button is just one of my favorite things in the world. I must have tagged that that guy from the Flow team whose name starts with A. Should maybe know who I'm talking about. But I must have tagged him in Salesforce at least 50 times on Twitter, probably saying how much it's like my favorite tool in the world now that I can do that, the debug. All right, let's see Meighan Brodkey. I know how to spell my own name, I promise. Next, okay. And I built it on the accounts again, just like I wasn't going to do. But yes, we'll pretend that it was on there. I'm so sorry, guys. I'll throw it on a video so you can see it, I swear, and post it on Twitter where it's on the contact. I just didn't read the object name, but that's what I would have done. So yes, okay. Pretty cool. Some pretty sweet components that they have. Really neat stuff that's available to you. You'll notice here that we have our errors going on, or if we scroll up here we have the account country, pick list not found. We have the pick list not found because we have the errors there as well. Pretty neat, tells you exactly where to look. Awesome. So next up, I want to tell you guys a little bit about some of the stuff for the devs. So the developers, there's some pretty awesome stuff out there. There are the developer documents that are available to you. I know we weren't able to go in depth on how to exactly build a component, but it's pretty straightforward. The Lightning component documents are available to you. You have the implements available for Flow screens, and this is how you're going to get things to start showing up. You can get started with your hello world. Every time I say that, I think Jean Valonas and her at Dreamforce and her Hello World story with Mike G. Awesome. But yes, so getting started, just different ways to set this up. There's the awesome component library. If you haven't checked it out, this is one of my favorite places now, the developer site, to just go and look for stuff. I think it's a great view of how things work. And just getting started and getting that look of Lightning. And so pretty straightforward. Again, there are resources out there, lightningflow.net. And we have here, I'll throw that into the chat as well. And I'm going to throw this one. All right. And then other than that, any questions about things, any other cool places to look, there is the entire place that's on the App Exchange for components and getting that started. I'll make sure to shoot that out on Twitter. But yeah, and other than that, I know that you probably want to wrap things up now. So any questions?
Let me refresh the Trailblazer community. Folks, if you do have additional questions, please post it out there. I'm just doing a couple of refreshes. Just going to give it another minute or two. Meighan, did you want to give a shout out on the Slack Ohana channel?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Also, anyone out here that hasn't joined Ohana Slack that's listening, a great place to go and ask any questions about process or workflow. Just saying. So feel free to reach out if you don't have a link for that. Great place to connect with the Ohana. And
all right, there are no additional questions.
Yeah.
Great. So again, thank you for coming back and being our third-time presenter. I think you and Doug Ayers are tied. So definitely, Meighan, come back again in the future. We love to have you back. So hopefully folks found this helpful, and our next session will be with Ian Gotts from Element Cloud. So register for that, and we will talk to you all next time. Thanks again, Meighan.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.